Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome back to the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation Youth Conservation Leadership Speaker Series. For those of you who are just joining us, this is your very first video. I'm Shannon Anderson and I'm the Education Director here at SWF. And today I'm joined by Lauren Markewicz from Parks Canada. Hi Lauren, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing just great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
All good.
All right, so let's just jump in. Let's just get started. So introduce yourself. Tell me what you do.
What do I do? What don't I do? So I work for Parks Canada, which is a national organization in charge of the different national parks in Canada, as well as national marine conservation areas, which is like a national park, but for water, and national historic sites. So I've previously worked at Fort Langley National Historic Site near Vancouver. I've also worked at Alpine National Park near Edmonton, and currently I work at Prince Albert National Park near Prince Albert in Saskatchewan. So about an hour north of Prince Albert or 2.5 hours north of Saskatoon.
Okay, fantastic. Sounds like you've moved around a lot.
Oh yeah, I will talk a little bit about the different kinds of jobs that.
Okay. Cool.
But essentially, I'm the interpretation supervisor or interpretation officer. So sometimes I do the interpretation, and sometimes most of the time I supervise people. I can get a bit more into that. I probably will. But essentially, I think of an interpreter as being halfway between a tour guide and halfway between an educator. So we're out in the field giving, field trips, guided hikes, campfire programs, crafts, activities, learn how to light a fire, learn how to identify a track, connecting people with nature.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds really exciting. Sounds like you do a whole lot of different stuff every day almost.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. So you just kind of gave me a couple of examples, but what other kind of activities, like what are the main activities that you and your team carry out I'm assuming mostly during the summertime, but maybe in the winter time?
So not always, just during the summer. Most of what we do is between May and like mid-September, because that's when most of my staff are on, and that's when the majority of visitors are here in the park. That being said, we definitely do stuff throughout the winter. I just spent a couple days doing fire lighting programs for February break. So
cool.
Learn how to use magnesium fire strikers and flint and steel, and compete to light a fire big enough to like burn through a string first, and you have a sense of achievement. Hooray.
That's really cool. Those are fun. I've done those before.
It's pretty fun. And it's like, because next time you do it, you won't have the nice parks lady standing over you giving you instructions. So I try to make it so they aren't just making a spark, but are actually making a flame, which is maybe a metaphor. I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't do a huge amount of programming in the winter. It depends on the site. Like if you're a historic site near a big city like Fort Langley, where I used to work, they do school programs all winter as well, and special events and stuff. And in the wintertime here, because I'm a supervisor, I definitely have stuff to do, planning for next year, hiring people, doing website updates. Like there's plenty of stuff for me to do as a supervisor, and sometimes stuff for my staff to do during the winter as well.
Okay, awesome. So it sounds like there's never a dull moment then.
The occasional paperwork moment.
Yeah.
It's always busy, sometimes still with paperwork because we are a federal agency, but
yes, of course.
We definitely keep busy.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so Lauren, what was it that got you interested in becoming an interpreter? Is this something that you've always wanted to be, or is this something that you just kind of came across by accident, or?
It's one of those things. I was always aware of interpretation, but I didn't know what it was as a kid. You see, because interpreters exist at like all manner of different sites. Like I went camping a lot as a kid, and I have a distinct recollection. This must have been Dinosaur Provincial Park in Alberta.
Oh, cool.
Where we attended a musical theater presentation in the campground, and I remember it being Star Wars themed, and it was like Luke Hoodoo Walker and like Seed 3PO, who was a tree, and like Toad. Anyway, I still have a distinct recollection of this, but like I still remember about these, badland ecosystems, even like 20, 30.
Yeah, it's stuck with you.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. And I grew up going to museums. I grew up thinking like, I want to work in a museum. I really enjoyed going to Fort Edmonton Park, which is a living history museum near Edmonton. So people in historical costume. So I was kind of aware of this. And then I slowly realized, wait, I could get paid to do that.
All the time, yeah.
So it's not just a place to go on my days off, but actually like I could be one of those people doing those fun things with visitors. And
yeah.
fell backwards into it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. It's really cool that you had one like distinct experience that you can remember that really kind of stuck with you. That's awesome. I would definitely remember all kinds of stuff about the Badlands if it was Star Wars themed.
I know, right?
So what kind of stuff? I know that interpretation is really diverse. So sometimes you you do programs biology based, history based, all kinds of different things. So what kind of stuff did you take to get to this spot?
Again, there's many different paths, as you say, to get to the interpretation world. Like on my team, I have someone who's a professional musician in the off season. I have
cool.
She has like country music. It's pretty great. And then I've also got someone who's like a teacher in training. So during the school year, she's like a student teacher. And in the summertime, she does this and gets some experience working with visitors. I have people who have biology, geology, history, French backgrounds. Like you can access this from so many different
ways.
But for me, I actually came at it from the history angle. So I'm a historian by training. I studied history at university during my in my bachelor's. I took French translation as my minor, and then of all things at the U of A, University of Alberta. And then I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so I worked abroad teaching English for a year in France, in Normandy, and then I came back and went to Carleton University in Ottawa studying public history in my master's. So thinking critically about history outside of university, outside of school, museums, historic sites, like those interpretive signs and plaques you see next to cool things. How is it that people encounter history outside of school? And how do we, like, why is it people know about Vimy Ridge and not these other battles? Or,
yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
So, I kind of accessed from that. You're not obliged to speak French and work for the federal government. A lot of people don't even apply for federal jobs because they assume they need to be bilingual and they're not confident in their English or not confident in their French. I was lucky in that I applied for a bilingual position because I was in French immersion growing up. Okay. And then my dad was like, what if you want to work for the federal government someday? It'll be.
I've heard that line too.
Oh, Dad, I don't know. And then here I am. And so they're not obliged to, but I remember hearing from my boss at the time when I applied for Elk Island National Park, my first federal job, there were 2 positions they were hiring for, which were exactly the same in every way, except one was bilingual and one only needed English. For my position, which of course would have beaten out any number of people as I was clearly the most qualified.
Yeah, obviously.
People applied, but for the English position, over 40 people applied.
Wow.
There is a difference. So if you do speak French, keep it up.
Yeah.
But if you don't speak French, it doesn't mean you can't get a federal job.
Okay, that's really good to know because I was going to say when I was growing up, I heard the same line. But having grown up in New Brunswick too, there's French.
It depends on the site. It depends on the site, and the further east you get, the closer you get. There's bilingual regions, like New Brunswick is a bilingual region, Quebec is primarily French, and bits of Ontario are bilingual regions too. Yeah. So the closer to that core of Francophonie, like you get to, the more bilingual positions there are throughout the organization. The further west you get, the further north you get. I mean, in the north, it's also beneficial to speak like interpretive or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Indigenous languages, we're really valuing. We're trying to value those and trying to get people who speak like Cree where we are and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't speak French, if you're like, say in Vancouver, that kind of thing, it's not the end of the world to not speak French because really it's only like visitor facing positions and a couple other ones that require bilingualism. For me, I supervise a team, so I have to be responsible for making sure our French is good. So that's why I speak French. But then I have of the 5 to 8 people I supervise, depending on funding, I have 2 or 3 bilingual positions underneath me. So
okay, well that's really good to know. It's good to know that even if you didn't say do French immersion growing up, that you shouldn't count yourself out. So that's great. Okay, so if I were to decide today that I was just going to walk out and quit my job. I want to be an interpreter. What kind of skills? It sounds really fun. What kind of
dream? Live the dream. Don't let your dreams just be dreams. Come work.
Yeah. So, what kind of skills should I work on? What are the things that I should do?
Yes. So the big thing is be passionate about your subject. That's the big thing. So find something that interests you in it. If you know you say you want to work for this and this historic site, or like Prince Albert National Park where I work, go on the website, find out, okay, they're big into elk and wetlands and like plant identification and Cree language stuff. Like, even if you're like not super interested in plants, for example, find an entree, find an element of it that makes you interested. So for example, I'm a historian. I'm like, I don't know anything about plants or whatever. But what I find interesting about, say, plants is like the human connection. So how have Cree people historically and currently used plants, certain species, or the history of landscapes. Like, I find people often perceive national parks as being like ahistorical, like there's no history here. It's just untouched landscape and has always been the same.
Right.
I find like, oh, historical photographs of the park from the 1920s, how does it look different than today? And it's not about the buildings that aren't there or are there. It's about, oh, the tree line changed. Why is that?
Yeah,
or, you know, how do people use these spaces, and, you know, things like that. So for me, I find the history angle and the human connection angle the most interesting part. And so you're not super interested in the rest of it, you can then use that to build off of it, if that makes sense. So for me, it's finding something about the subject that interests you, visit lots of interpretive sites, go to attend programs at museums and campgrounds and things like that, see what's out there, see what you like, and see what I do that differently and why. Even like what was it, things like volunteer work, like you can, like a lot of historic sites have junior volunteer positions, so you can try it out for like 1 day a week in the summertime, see what it is, or
that's really
things
cool.
like that. My other pro tip, if you're not sure what to work on, because it's, as you say, interpretation is such a wide field. If you don't know what to work on, we tell you. Federal jobs from Environment Canada, Parks Canada, Library and Archives Canada, Public Works, all federal jobs that are public are posted on one website, jobs.gc.ca. gc.ca. Look through the job posters. Go Google right now, jobs.gc.ca, make an account, look for Parks Canada jobs. Be like, okay, there's a trail crew person, there's a scientist here and a historian there, whatever it is. Take a look. And we actually tell you not just what experience you need, but other kinds of knowledge, abilities, and personal suitabilities in there. So like, oh man, this particular job, you need to know more about the history of blah, 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 or knowledge of how to work these kinds of machines, or, or it's really important you have attention to detail or teamwork skills or whatever. So then you can then go through and go like, okay, in 5 years, when I graduate, I would love to work as the media relations person for this industry. Okay, I need at least 2 years experience doing social media work and website stuff. Okay, and now you can go look out for volunteer work or for paid jobs that might build towards that experience. You don't have to wait to find out what experience you need to get that job. So maybe you're not going to be able to leap into that out of high school. I probably not. You know,
that's a really good tip.
Just go on the website, find jobs. It's not a secret what we're looking for.
No.
And the next time that job is posted, when you're looking, you can be poised to click apply now.
Yeah, no kidding. I really, like, honestly, I really wish I had a thought of that when I was in high school. That's a really good idea. And with so many national parks across the country, you know, like, and historic sites, I mean, opportunities, I'm sure, are practically endless. You know, they're always coming up. So that's really
the thing. It's like what was it? We always like to joke about, you can do the slow tour of Canada working for Parks Canada, because most sites have the same positions. So like interpretation jobs, like my job exists at any site that has visitors, you know, and so there's different like priorities and different like, not strengths, what's the word looking for? Like emphases on different sites. So maybe my job up north has other duties that I don't have, or maybe at historic sites, like some of my job is actually shared with another person or something like that.
Right.
But roughly the same job exists. So if you get an entry-level position, you can build your way up and like, oh, I'll work for Thousand Islands and I'll go work for, you know, Wood Buffalo National Park. You could do a tour and try out different sites if you want.
Absolutely. And get to know our country too, or province even. That's really, really cool. So it sounds like you've basically hit the jackpot when it comes to careers. But if you were to choose a different career today or tomorrow, what would you be? Was there something that when you were a kid, you were always like gunning for? Or?
Well, like I was growing up, I was thinking, oh, I'll probably work as a teacher, or maybe I'll work in a museum. But it was kind of like a formless idea of like, maybe I'll work in a museum. Doing what? I don't know. I just
something.
Right? But I was thinking about it recently. I've been actually really enjoying translation. Like back in like we talk about interpretation, most people think translator, and we are interpreting nature, interpreting history. But because I'm fluent, like I've actually had several encounters where, like, for example, I'm on a tour for a conference in France as a visitor with some friends who are Americans, Italians, and English people from like England. And then the tour organizer is sort of bilingual. And then we go up to the tour guide. It turns out he doesn't speak English. It's just French. And so we get this tour of this beautiful like paleontological site in French. And so I was just kind of co-opted in like, okay,
you're here. So
to make it understandable for visitors. So it was quite fun. I really quite enjoy that. And I enjoy working with my French speaking colleagues and my English speaking colleagues to make sure that we still have that bilingual offer on I'm the go-to person for like, hey, Lauren, I'm writing this sign about there's a dangerous elk in the area. Can you double check my French?
Yeah.
So that's been quite fun. So I like the translation aspect. Cool. And I also, helping people come to understand things, which is quite parallel with my current job. But I'm thinking about writing work because I've written a book for Parks Canada on the history of bison conservation, free downloadable PDF on Elk Island National Park's website.
I'm checking that out. Thanks.
Please do. If you want to learn more about the history of bison conservation, look at some cool historical photographs and modern photographs of bison. It's pretty neat. That's my little plug. But also I would love to write some like nonfiction books, things like that. Like I really want to write a book. This may be too nerdy. I don't know. There's the Buffalo Roundup of 1907 is like a group of like dozens of like Mexican and First Nations cowboys who were like herding wild bison onto trains. 800 of them over the course of like 5 years, setting them up to what is now Elk Island National Park in 1907 onwards. Anyway, you cannot make this stuff up. There's like birds are nearly trampled to death. Anyway, like
oh my god.
And these are stories that are not well known. And I'm like, I think also if I hadn't been an interpreter, I'd probably become like a historian in terms of a popular history author would be what I would writing, not for an academic audience, but like a popular audience. That being said, I might still do that. So who knows?
Yeah, no kidding. And you get all kinds of time. It's the world's your oyster. That's really cool. I'm totally looking up your book after this. So you mentioned a little earlier that Parks, some historic sites offers the junior program or whatever volunteer program. Is there any other programs like that or other organizations you would recommend getting involved with if you think you're an interpreter, you want to get out there, get practice in maybe?
There's a couple different things that I can think of off the top of my head. So for example, many Parks Canada sites have what they call like friends groups. So like friends of Riding Mountain National Park, friends of Fort Langley, like things like that. And what they do is, depending on the organization, it's a volunteer organization, and they do something in relationship with the park. So the Friends of Prince Albert National Park do like different special events based out of their bookstore. So like Cree language classes for the public, or elder talks, or or even like there's musical evenings and things like that. You can be involved with that kind of group. At other places like Elk Island National Park, the Friends group is more science focused. So they help. For example, there was a researcher, I think she was based out of, I want to say University of British Columbia, but I could be wrong, or Simon Fraser. Anyway, she was doing research on fishers in the park, like the weasel, not like fisher people. Weasel research, and she had a bunch of wildlife cameras set up throughout the park, as well as like barbed wire and like a little like some fish on a tree to get little bits of hair, like hair samples.
Okay, yeah.
To learn about the genetics. It was very interesting. But there's like 20 or 30 of these wildlife cameras set up. So the volunteer group hiked out to these random spots in the park, not on trails. You could take
right, of course.
and then change the batteries in the SD cards of these wildlife cameras. So you just sign up and you're part of the Friends group, and then you just go out and change these things every so often. So Friends groups are really handy to just get involved with stuff going on in the park. It really depends on the site, but they're usually looking for help. Universities also can often help hook you up with short-term volunteer gigs that can help you get some field experience. Often universities also have like outdoor clubs, or even like a Parks Canada club that So people will go out on camping trips together, spend time on the landscape, discuss conservation issues. Like there's definitely groups like that, like, you know, thinking about the Sierra Club, CPAWS, the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society.
Yeah.
You know, volunteer and activist groups that are really concerned about conservation work. And so it's not a bad thing to like see what kind of work they're doing. Are they doing events? Are they doing guided hikes? Are they needing volunteers to help spread awareness of something?
Yeah.
But also like Parks Canada sometimes also recruits volunteers directly, and you can contribute to citizen science things. So for example, here in Prince Albert National Park, we do a loon survey every year.
Oh, cool.
Various lakes throughout the park. Some of them are pretty accessible, like you can just drive right there and like hop on a canoe. Some of them you have to like haul yourself through the bush a bit. But it's really handy for us to know how many breeding pairs of loons are there, because they're an indicator species. We can learn more about the health of the lake. So essentially we ask that people do, I want to say it's once a month throughout the summer kind of thing. Like, so 4 or 5 times you have to go out on a boat or go out on the lake and count and listen for loons for an hour or two. And then you back your data. And that really helps the park because we can't be everywhere at once.
Right, absolutely.
We do nothing but track loons, you know, kind of thing for one person all summer to get to all of these different places. So if you're the kind of person who enjoys spending time outside and you want to work for parks in the future, there are definitely volunteer things like that, citizen science things, where you can gather data, spend time in the landscape, and really for you itself, it's actually not that much, like 1 day a month. And then you can say you are part of this.
Right. And then you're helping out this really big project. That's really cool. That's a lot of different avenues to get in there. That's really, really great advice. That's awesome. Not only this, if you're thinking about future careers and stuff, just for interest's sake though, too. That sounds like there's so many different programs for just about everybody out there. So that's pretty cool.
Well, that's the thing. Like if you know, for me, for volunteering, I think it's about getting experience and having experiences that you care about. So if you're the kind of person who wants to work for parks, you probably want to spend time outside. That's my assumption. Seems to attract outdoorsy people, you know, so spend that time and, you know, do a little bit of volunteering. That's not a bad thing. But even like, you know, even if you're not, you're as a career, don't want to spend your days at the gate, at the campground taking money. There are a lot of entry-level jobs as well, where you can spend time in the park. You're working for the park, even if it's like, I don't want to do this forever. For a couple that pays reasonably well as an entry-level job, hey, you work in the campground for a bit, you really get to know the park, maybe live in the park. Depending on the park, some of them have staff housing, some of them don't. Yeah, it's a good place to get involved.
Absolutely. So I feel like you've already given so much good advice. I'm definitely still thinking about what you said about just checking out different jobs online. But if there was one piece of advice that you'd give to a high school student or somebody in university who's trying to figure out what they want to do, you know, is there a little nugget of wisdom that you have that you pass on?
So much wisdom. I like to think of myself as a wise person. I don't know if I am. I talk fast. Maybe that's anyway. My advice would be, don't be afraid to think outside the box in terms of career choices. Many people come to parks working from different angles. And then, you know, like, for example, even traditional jobs, you think of like an accountant or a doctor or whatever. You can do that, but for parks. Like we have first aiders who work here in the summertime.
Right.
Finance people, if you like editing videos, well, we have media people and website people. We have if you want to like spend time in the landscape, if you want to just spend time ATVing and chainsawing things, like not at the same time, and things that we're working carpentry and plumbing, like if you can envision a job, you can probably do it, but in a national park, which is kind of cool. And also, don't be afraid to move. I think people are like, oh, I don't know, it's the first time away from home, or I want to sit close to my family, or I love living in this city and it's the best place to be and I only want to be here. Well, how do you know it's the best place for you to live if you've never tried anywhere else? And the cool thing about parks, sometimes it's a detriment because it's sometimes hard to break in from being a seasonal staff member to being a year-round staff member because there are fewer year-round jobs.
Yeah.
If you're like, I don't know if I want to live forever in Wood Buffalo National Park, or move up to Inuvik or Vancouver Island or, you know, wherever, but you could work there for a summer and see, you know, summer, you know, at the gates and then surfing in your off time in Pacific National Park, you know, or just to try a couple summer jobs in different corners of the country. Don't be to move. And sometimes it's harder to get the experience in the city that you eventually want to end up in, but spend a couple of years up north. A lot of people go up to Iqaluit, Inuvik, places like that. There's a lot of good experience to have up there. You can get, it's easier to get in because fewer people are applying for those ones.
Right.
Spend a couple of years there, and then you're a really competitive candidate to come work down south.
Then your resume stacked.
Well, for high school students specifically, a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of cool summer jobs that are only good if you're currently a university student. You have a full-time student before and after the summer. We have programs like FSWEP. We like our acronyms. Federal Student Work Experience Program, Young Canada Works, and there's a new one coming down the line. I don't know if it's been officially announced yet, but we've got another one coming down the line, different pot of funding. So we have money specifically for university students, and you don't have to go through all the hoops like a lot of other federal jobs, but it's meant to give young Canadians job experience relevant to their field, so they can then be competitive candidates for entry level, just above entry level. So my brother, this is a personal example, he got an FSWEP job working for Environment Canada at a weather station near Edmonton. And his fiance, they met in the same program, studying science, physical sciences, or earth and atmospheric sciences at university. The only difference between the two, he actually had worse grades than she did, was she continued to work at her high school and university job at a greenhouse, and she's assistant manager and, succeeded decently well. My brother took this FSWEP job. Now he works for Environment Canada repairing weather stations. The only difference is he spent a summer working for Environment Canada. Then he worked a couple summers as a gate staff person with Parks Canada. So he had 3 summers as a federal person.
Right.
He knows the system, he knows the agency, he knows what kind of, what do they expect? What are they looking for? He got some extra training because he's like, I want to eventually work for Environment Canada. I can do some learning things while I'm working for the federal government. He was a very strong candidate because he'd already been working sort of in his field for a couple summers. Whereas his fiance, who had better grades, didn't get that practical experience because she waited to apply for federal jobs until after she graduated, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good caution. Yeah, no, I was going to say, I've had a few friends who've done like similar things too. And yeah, it's definitely been a hand up for them to have gotten in there and do a couple of summers. And like you said, you can test it out and explore the country, but also just figure out where you want to be in the world, which is kind of cool.
That's exactly it. So yeah, and you know what? I did it. Young Lauren's first federal job was as an FSWEP student with Library and Archives Canada in Gatineau, working behind the scenes, helping organize and create finding aids for historical documents. I got to see some really cool behind the scenes stuff. Helped me as a researcher to know, okay, when I request documents, what's it like at the other end? But I also learned I didn't want to work in a cubicle my whole life.
And that is just as important as figuring out what you want to do. I definitely agree.
It was a good job. I got paid well. I got a lot of good experience. I learned a lot, but I also learned I didn't want to work for that organization, not because it's a bad organization, but it's because it wasn't a good fit for me, my personality, and what I want to do going forward. That is also really important. My mom always says, like, you can survive anything for 3 months if you're not super fast, that kind of thing. Try it out. So I definitely encourage people, like, think about doing the slow tour of Canada.
Yeah.
If you're interested in working for conservation groups going forward, working outside, getting paid to learn stuff. Like I didn't know anything about bison before I worked at Elk Island National Park. I'm a historian. I did fur trade history, a little bit of that. But then I really immersed myself in the story of bison conservation, helping out with bison handling. Like I would actually help bison in the wintertime to go to Banff National Park and stuff. And then I did research to share with visitors. And then I eventually got given a project where I wrote a book about it. And now I'm, not to brag or nothing, I'm technically an internationally recognized bison expert now, because I'm a part of
amazing
this group for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, wearing my history hat and not my Parks Canada hat. My volunteer time, but it's on the basis and the strength of the historical work that I was doing for Parks Canada. So, and that was after working intensely for 3 or 4 years on that at one site. So it's one of those things, you may not be an expert going in, but you can be an expert coming out.
Absolutely. That's really cool.
Learn some stuff. Get outside your comfort zone a little bit and do the slow tour of Canada. Try out different sites.
Absolutely. I also just love that term. That's wonderful. Well, Lauren, I'm not going to keep you all day, but I would like to thank you very much for coming on. And for those of you who are watching us, stay tuned. We'll have another professional in conservation come talk to us next week. So see you later, everybody.
Maybe I'll see you all in green uniforms in the future.
Fantastic.